Prof, welcome to the program, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you too, Nancy. I'm delighted to be with you.
Okay, Prof, let me begin by asking you, let's examine trade in Africa and how you think a historical overview from colonial rule to post-colonial economic dynamics have homogenized the continent. Do you think that that has inhibited trade prospects for Africa?
Thank you for your question, Nancy. It's a very good question. Let me unpack it in two ways. Firstly, yes, there is a colonial continuity in the way that Africa trades today. That is, the colonial continuity comes from the dependence on commodities for exports. So basic commodities is what dominates Africa's exports, and that's a legacy from colonial times. Another legacy from colonial times is that our infrastructure for trade is for export out of the continent, is not really for connecting African countries to trade with one another. That too is a legacy of colonial times. But having said that, it is now up to us in this post-colonial era. In fact, it's even long overdue because we're now approaching 70 years of independence. So it's now up to us to change that narrative and to change that pattern. And happily, this is happening. It is happening in the sense that intra-African trade, that is trade between African countries, is relatively small, about 15% of Africa's total trade, but it is the most diversified part of Africa's trade. What we are seeing is that up to 60% of what we trade among ourselves, contrary to received wisdom, but when you look at the data, up to 60% of what we trade among ourselves is actually value-added products. I mean, this could range from basic things like palm oil, which is value-added, of course, to dried fish, which is value-added, of course, but then also increasingly we're trading manufacturers, whether it is cosmetics, food products that have been processed, etc. And then, of course, as you know, there is the African Continental Free Trade Area that seeks to accelerate this trade between African countries. Let me just end at this point by making one more important caveat. What I have been advocating for is not that Africa stops trading with the rest of the world and only carries out intra-African trade, but rather what I've been advocating is that, in fact, we do both. We do both, and we try to increase our share of trade with the rest of the world, and we try to boost our intra-African trade.
Okay, so how do we now, with what you've said, how do we detangle the issue that African countries trade similar goods? Because, over the years, it's been said that we don't trade amongst each other, and that is also part of why the African Continental Free Trade Area was also designed. So how do we detangle that? Because it's okay, in Ghana, for example, they have oil, Nigeria has oil, Angola has oil, Ghana has cocoa, Ivory Coast has cocoa, Botswana has diamond, which other country has diamond? A lot, we have the same commodities.
Nancy, that it is a myth. This is a myth that we need to overcome. Firstly, what you're talking about is comparability and substitutionality. Before I come to what the actual remind you that in Europe, for example, if you take the automobile sector, you have Volkswagen, you have Mercedes, you have Audi, you have Range Rover, you have Peugeot, you have Renault. They all produce cars, but they trade different cars because it gives consumers a choice. Whether to drive a Renault or to drive a Volkswagen or to drive a Mercedes, etc. So I think we have to understand that producing the same thing and trading the same thing is not necessarily a bad thing because it gives consumers choice. But to unpack the data, it's false to say that the trade among African countries is about cocoa, diamonds. That is not what Africans are trading. If you look at the data, it's very interesting. We're trading fish, we're trading meat, we're trading grains, we're trading food products. West Africa, for example, is self-sufficient in items like yam and cassava. We're trading these things. It's going across border. It's self-sufficient in palm oil. We're trading these things. It's going across border. A lot of cosmetics products also show up in the statistics. It's very interesting. But again, Africans like to look nice and well. So it shows up in the statistics. Beverages show up in the statistics. And there are different types of beverages, different types of teas, for example. And you give the consumer the choice of which one they want: coffee, cocoa, different types of varieties of these products. We're also seeing dairy products are being traded among African countries, milk, cheese, things like that. We are seeing fruit being, again, a variety of fruit. I mean, Nancy, I'm sure you shop in the supermarket. You only need to go to the supermarket, look and see what is on the shelves, look to see where they're from. You're going to see products from Egypt, from Tunisia, from South Africa, from Ghana, etc. So I think it's a myth. We need to get over this myth because the data, the statistics, when you look at the data on inter-African trade, it doesn't say that we are trading diamonds. In fact, all the, diamonds, oil, these products are the commodities that are going out of the
Outside.
continent.
Mm.
Yes, when we trade among ourselves, this is the point I'm making. We're trading value-added products. This is a point at which I would like to share my book, How Africa Trades.
Mm.
And what we have done in this book is to unpack the data. We have used a lot of charts to help people to understand that African trade is not as concentrated as people would think. By the way, this book can be downloaded free of charge from the London School of Economics Press. Just Google it, How Africa Trades, very easy.
Mm.
How Africa Trades, and you can get a free copy.
Prof, you did a wonderful job with that book because I wouldn't say that I finished reading it, but I've been taking it piece by piece, and
Good. That's the way to take it.
I've been taking it piece by piece, and when I definitely saw the book, I reached out to you that, yeah, and of course I've seen your articles, what you've been doing over the years. So I said, no, Professor Luke is someone I really have to speak with on this show. So I also want to say thank you very much for speaking with me this morning, creating time out of your very busy schedule to speak with me. Now that you have demystified the myth, I don't know why, even as Africans, we still think that that myth is here to stay, and we are also still, taking stuff from that myth and all of that. So I don't know how we can
Yeah.
demystify that myth.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. Nancy, very interesting point here. The first thing to say is that we tend to be protective of our small markets. Whatever we produce in our small countries, we want to be protective of that. We are protective. Our instinct is to be protective of our markets, that other things coming into our markets will just simply displace our goods. That is, again, another myth because when you give the consumer choice, you also are driving efficiencies in production, in producing at scale, and so on. So the first thing we need to do is really open up our borders so we could trade better with one another.
Mm.
The next thing we need to do is to continue what is now happening across the continent at a rapid rate. That is, we're putting in the infrastructure to
Mm.
support the trade.
Now,
And
Now, Prof,
yeah,
sorry, let me now
go ahead.
come in here with with a question to, for you to add in terms of your answer. So, is African Continental Free Trade Area is after now really the bazooka that will solve the market and trading efficiencies that we have, as well as how can Africa really develop trade with the deficiency of infrastructure that we have? Because trade, you actually also posited in your book that trade is about development, and that
Yes.
also leaders. So I'm taking like 3, 4 questions at the same time because I know you've got
Sure,
to
sure, sure.
run along, and I hope you're taking note. Anyway, you're a prof, so
Yeah,
so
no,
so there's
that's
capacity to
fine.
take
That's
note
fine.
of all of what I'm saying. So I've just asked if after is truly the bazooka in eliminating market and trade efficiencies. I have also asked, with the death of infrastructure across Africa, how do we intend to see trade development? Then the third question is, our leaders, how visionary are they in terms of even understanding the linkage between trade and development. The fourth question, Prof, is what does Africa need to do to benefit from a shift in globalization? Globalization is actually changing. We see R&D and innovation becoming important. We're also seeing, for example, the services sector growing 60% faster than goods. So how can Africa, how can Africa transform to be able to transform also itself for the shift in globalization? And while I ask that, there's a question that came in on Twitter, and let me quickly find it for when I said I was going to interview you, someone sent a message, and I hope I'm able to get that very quickly. Yes, he said I should ask Prof, but it's a Nigeria-specific question. He said I should ask about Nigerians' compliance with Protocols 3, intellectual property rights, which also dovetails from the question I asked earlier about the shift in globalization. You're seeing a lot more about branding, software, intellectual property, and all of that. So God help you, Prof. 4
Oh,
questions
yeah.
now.
Yeah, a lot of questions. Let's begin with infrastructure.
Yeah.
This is changing rapidly. Uh, in our book, we do mention that I think the latest figures now is that you have something like 2 million miles of paved road in motorable road in Africa. We still need to do more, but you can look at the data in the book. So that is changing. You can drive from Lagos to Abidjan quite easily on a highway, and there are several other highways linking African countries. We have not done as well on rail, but gradually we are beginning to see, example, Mombasa to Kigali. We are seeing Dar es Salaam also to Kigali through Burundi and so on. We are seeing from Namibia, Windhoek, the port of Windhoek, all the way to Lusaka. So it is happening. It's not. We have to understand that all of this is not going to happen overnight. And of course, the glass is half full, or if you like, it is half empty. But it is happening. It is gradually happening. On air links, again, you can see now a proliferation of different airlines crisscrossing the continent and so on. You no longer have to fly to Europe and then back to Africa if you're moving from one African country to the other. So all that is changing. More needs to be done. I'm not saying that we have arrived. We definitely have not arrived. More needs to be done. But the infrastructure situation is an ongoing development that we are seeing. And this is also driving the trade that we are talking about that is much more diversified than our trade with the rest of the world. So that's on the infrastructure. It is happening. It is happening slowly, not as fast as we would like, but it is happening. On the next question about the AFCFTA and the leadership, the vision of our leaders, well, it is our leaders who signed that agreement, and they are supporting its implementation. Would like to see implementation go faster, but I think the vision behind it is the understanding that it is trade that is generating the most in terms of revenues into our countries. Right now, this is approaching $500 billion a year that we're getting from trade. Believe you me, when you look at this data, it is a multiple of foreign aid. It is combined with foreign direct investments, combined even with remittances that Africans in the diaspora are sending back. So our biggest source of foreign exchange is trade, both outside the continent and within the continent. So so I think our leaders understand this. Myself, I think they put too much emphasis on debt, on overseas development assistance, on the financial side. They put a lot of emphasis on that, but I understand the pressures why they would put so much emphasis with partners on finance. But really, the emphasis should be on trade, and we need to scale up. We need to ensure that our trade ministry is well capacitated. Usually, sometimes in an African country, the trade ministry is in in the backwater part of the among the government ministries and so on. So I think we need to put trade front and center. We need to just look and see what our partners are doing. The US, the EU, China, India put so much emphasis on trade because they know that that is what brings wealth into a country. There's no other way. You cannot do it through debt. You cannot do it through financial handouts. You have to do it through trade. There's no plan B, as I like to say. It's only trade that we have. Then your other question on the shift in the globalization, yes, of course, that's a very important one, and it opens up opportunities for us. As we are seeing the global order is changing from a unipolar world to a multipolar world. We are seeing the frictions among major powers. I think this opens up an opportunity for us as Africans, and I think this is already happening. You see all these summits between Africa and Turkey, Africa and the US, Africa and the EU, Africa and France, Africa and China, etc. I think these are increasingly Africans are becoming transactional in these summits and in what they want from the different partners. And I think we need to continue to go in that direction. You
Mm,
also raised the question of services, and I fully agree with you. And in fact, you cannot have trading goods without trading services because all your logistics, your transport, your finance, all of these concern services. But beyond that, we have to also, this our continent, understand that even some services like education, health, and so on can be traded among ourselves. And it's already happening. I mean, I know of African students who are studying in Nigeria, who are studying in South Africa. This is trade in education services. I know of Africans who are going to Egypt, to Tunisia, to Nigeria, to Ghana for health services. So this is also trade in services. Of course, we need to regulate these things, and it's where we tend to be weak on the regulation. But these are all opportunities. Tourism services is opening up.
mm,
Transport services, I mentioned that along with infrastructure, we are seeing, the transport services improving. So behind all this, the companies, the businesses that are supporting the logistics, providing the transport carriers, etc. So services, of course, immensely important, and it supports trading in goods. And of course, the African Continental Free Trade Area, one of its objectives is to open up services as well. And increasingly, as Africans are getting richer, they're also becoming tourists in other countries. We're seeing people visiting Nigeria, Mauritius, South Africa, just to go on vacation. So, the tourism, even intra-African tourism is growing. And again, look at the data. Don't just take my word for it. When we look at the data myself, sometimes I'm astonished at what is happening on our continent, which we don't seem to appreciate. Let me stop here.
okay, because I know I have like 4 minutes more with you, if I'm not mistaken, and I
Yes,
want to, yes,
correct, correct.
I want to put in as much as possible. Now the next question would be around AGOA. Of course, the AGOA conversation is coming up again. We had an AGOA forum in South Africa just a few days ago. We know that it was enacted under President Bill Clinton in May 2000. It's
Clinton,
been,
yes.
yes, it's been renewed twice. It's due to expire in 2025. But when I also look at data, and I like that you were really talking about data. When I was looking at data in 2021, 1% of US imports from AGOA benefit. We had 1% of US imports from AGOA beneficiaries. We have about 35 countries. Just recently, the US removed Niger, all those countries that were, that we saw coups
Yeah,
happening there,
yeah,
they removed them
yeah.
from AGOA. My question to you now is AGOA underutilized? Then number two, as there is a call for a renewal of AGOA, should we have a rethink? What kind of reforms should we have for AGOA? Then the third question is Africa's contribution to WTO. We have an African as the head of WTO, a Nigerian, Dr. Konjo Iweala. What can actually also be done? How can Africa contribute more to WTO? And perhaps my last question should be around the role of regional bodies to promote trade. Then, perhaps finally, our agreements also with trade agreements, perhaps with the EU, then the almighty China. I can't leave this interview without speaking to you about China. Yeah, because when I was taking a look at data too, trade deficit of Africa has a trade deficit of $47 billion with China. So how do we create more value from China? Prof, over to you.
Yeah. Okay, you have a lot there again. Now, firstly, let me begin with the regional bodies, because they're very close to my heart. And this is like what we call the REX, the regional economic
Mm,
communities like
yeah,
ECOWAS,
yeah.
EAC,
Sadiq
etc.
and all that.
Yeah,
Mm,
exactly. Now, we already moving towards having a continent-wide free trade area, which is nice, is very good. But Africa is a continent of 30 million square kilometers. It is the second largest continent on the planet after Asia.
Asia.
Um, so, it is such a vast continent with all these, differences between the regions that, in my opinion, we still need the REX. We need the REX for helping with areas like trade facilitation, the transport connectivity that we have been talking about, and so on. So there are many things that I think REX like ECOWAS can continue to do. And of course, also areas like peace and security, which we see ECOWAS is quite active. So we need that kind of approach at the sub-regional level, even as we are consolidating our markets at the continental level. So for me, the two go hand in hand. They are not contradictory. Then your question specifically on WTO, and then I'll come to the other ones that
Mm,
you raised, like AGOA, etc. For the WTO, what I have been arguing is that we need a new deal at the WTO that will grant us uh, non reciprocal access to all the markets in the world. Right now we only account for 2.3% of global trade, and that is too low. So even if all the countries of the world open up to us, and we don't have to reciprocate this whilst we are building up our own productive capacity, it's not going to make a big change to in a systemic terms. This is what I've been arguing, and I think that our leaders should be pushing for this kind of uh, market access to other countries in the world, and they can use the WTO for this. In fact, AGOA is actually modeled on a non-reciprocal basis. That is, we don't have to open up to the US. The US has opened up to us. And actually, I've also argued that we are not really fully appreciating AGOA because the US is the only country that has given us this kind of market access. We don't have it from China. We don't have it from the EU. We don't have it from anyone else. And that is exactly the model that we need at this stage of development. This is what I've been arguing. And you have seen, now let me say a bit about AGOA. What I've been astonished at looking at the data is how much of processed goods, manufactured goods, we are sending under AGOA. And if you compare this with the data with China, we are sending just commodities, whereas to the US market, we are sending South Africa is sending automobiles, we're sending textiles, and we're sending clothes that are manufactured places like Ethiopia, we're sending chocolate from Ghana, etc. So again, that is the kind of trade that we want. And I think it has been underappreciated really what AGOA has done for us as Africans. And we need to do more. Of course, we need to, you mentioned AGOA is underutilized. Yes, we need to do more under AGOA. Nigeria, for example, I think can do a lot more under AGOA. Then you also asked the question about intellectual property rights.
mm,
Yes, this is one of the protocols of the AFCFTA, and I think we need to protect our intellectual property, our biodiversity, our music, our fashion designs, traditional knowledge. There's much that we need to protect. We're losing billions of dollars every year because we're not protecting them adequately. And again, under the FCFTA, there are now uh, measures to help us to go in that direction. Let me just end with this, Nancy. Me, I am quite optimistic about trade in Africa. I think I take a lot of courage from what I see in the data, not what I read in the newspapers, because sometimes I find the newspapers uninformed. But when I look at
mm,
the actual data as to what is happening on the ground, I'm really quite encouraged. And my last point is we're a market of 1.2 billion people. This is a huge market, and we are not making use of this market. We need to make use of this market because the demand is there. Among the 1.2 billion people, there is an estimate now that 350 million of us you could class as middle class. That is, we have disposable income of more than $10 a day. That is a lot. That is almost like the population of Europe. So it is a huge market. Our partners know that this is a huge market, and they are coming at us. You can see it all sectors, whether it is digital sector, whether it is, of course, manufactured goods. They want this market. So I think we need to be smart. We need to manage this market well, and we need to make sure that we're using trade for our development. So let me stop here.
Okay, Prof. I don't know if you've answered the question on China, but perhaps,
Well, yeah,
yeah,
in passing, yes.
yeah.
Well, one of my disappointments, and I do raise this in the book, is that we don't have a trade policy framework with China. And I think that means that where you don't have a trade policy framework, we're not regulating the trade. That means it's open, and I don't think this is in our interest. And I contrast this with Europe. I say we do have a policy framework with Europe. It's not what I like, but we do have it, so it's regulated. With the US, under AGOA, we have it. I don't like all aspects of AGOA. I don't think it's correct, as you rightly point out, for countries that have difficulties, political difficulties, to be kicked out of AGOA, because I think it impacts jobs. We have seen in Ethiopia, when Ethiopia was kicked out of AGOA, about 90,000 jobs were put at risk. Investors who have invested in good faith are losing. So myself, I think the US should use diplomatic channels to sort out the problems that arise. And we are developing. We are going through a period of history that can be turbulent, as they have themselves have in the early stage of their development, went through all these turbulences that we also have. So I think they should understand that. I think our leaders should be pushing very hard for diplomatic solutions as AGOA is being renewed. I've called for 20 years that AGOA should be renewed for 20 years. I was disappointed to see some of our leaders are talking only about 10 years. But I think we should be pushing for more. And I think, as I said, generally with our partners, we should be asking for more, not less, because trade is so important for our development.
Thank you very much, Prof, for your time. I appreciate that, and I hope to talk to you very soon. Again, let's see
Indeed.
what
Anytime,
happens.
yes, I hope this will be the first of several of these conversations.
Yes.
Look forward to talking to you again, Nancy.
Thank you very much, Prof.